Hi guys, welcome to Money and Plants. This is episode number 32 and this is a special episode of the podcast because I have one of America's top cardiologists on the show. I was really pleased when Dr Joel Kahn agreed to speak to me on Money and Plants a few weeks ago. And in this conversation coming up, we have a really interesting discussion about health, about heart health, about brain health, about nutrition, about all of the things that potentially can make you and me sick. One of the reasons why I started this podcast was I wanted to try and create content which would maybe educate, empower, and dare I say it, inspire you and me to make better decisions in our own life, right? And I'm really pleased with this conversation. I hope you get something from it, but not only something from it, I hope you put into action some of what Dr. Joel Kahn recommends. Let's roll the tape. I hope you enjoy it. If you want to contact me, you can reach me at Conor@conordivine.com. Thank you. Dr. Joel Kahn, how are you? You're really welcome to Money and Plants. I'm in Ireland. I think you're living and working close to Detroit. Is that correct?
Correct. The Motor City, Ford Motor, General Motor, Chrysler. But we've got some good plant-based life going on here in Detroit, Michigan.
And are you still building cars in Detroit, Michigan? Is the factory still going?
It's the primary, industry, and all the world headquarters are here. So yes, and then all the companies that support it from all over the world. So we have our sports and we have some travel and we have some tech, but we are a automotive town. We build a lot of cars still in Detroit.
Excellent. Look, you're not on to talk about cars. I'm really pleased and privileged to have you on Money and Plants. I've been following your work for many years. My listeners know that I'm plant-based. They know that I've went through this incredible transformation in the last number of years. And I want to thank you. I said to you off camera, I want to thank you for encouraging people like me to take this pathway. But before we get stuck into it, you are an interventional cardiologist. Can you just explain what that means?
Sure. I grew up in Detroit. I went to a university called University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, famous sports school, famous university. And then I wanted to be a cardiologist since I was a child. And you have to make a decision during training. You're just a general cardiologist or there are subspecialties. And I was training right about when it really got exciting that we could find blockages and fix them without open heart surgery, bypass surgery. That's called balloon angioplasty. A lot of the companies are in Ireland for tax reasons. They make the other product that's called heart stents in Galway. Many of them are in Galway. United States companies with, basically divisions that produce. So I got very involved with that, and it's very exciting, truly, to get that call. Somebody's having a heart attack, and maybe you're in the hospital, maybe you're at home and you drive in way too fast, break the law, get somebody's heart attack stopped by opening the arteries. But I was actually vegan before that. I became vegan at age 18, whole food, plant-based. So by the time all of med school training and by the time I was practicing interventional cardiology, I was also a preventive guy, a nutrition guy, and I would talk to my patients. There wasn't a lot back then. I finished training in 1990, so I've been out for over 30 years. This book came out in 1990, Dr. Dean Ornish, Reversing Heart Disease. And, so I knew that there was something to this diet stuff. My patients actually were told, I fixed you today with a stent, but that didn't fix you a year from now or 5 years from now. Only managing stress, exercise, quitting smoking, and eating. And Dr. Ornish teaches also whole food, plant-based nutrition. That's the only thing that's going to fix you. So I was lucky that I've had this career my entire time where there was this, you have to accept there is technology, there's advances, there are drugs. But if you don't need them and you can manage it by a healthy lifestyle, obviously that should be goal number one, is never meet me or only meet me to talk about nutrition. We've already failed if you're meeting me because you need a stent.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So listen, the cardiovascular disease, heart disease, according to Google anyway, it kills about 17 million people across the world every year. It's the world's largest killer. Very briefly, can you explain three things? So what is cardiovascular disease? How does it happen? And can we reverse it then through nutrition, what we put in our mouth?
Right, and your statistic is right. So cardiovascular disease, think of it as a pie. The biggest piece of the pie is high blood pressure. That is considered a cardiovascular disease. And high blood pressure kills more people than anything in the world because it leads to heart attack, stroke, kidney failure, amputation of the legs, aneurysms. So get a home blood pressure cuff, check your blood pressure. But besides that, which is usually treated with diet, exercise, and medication, blood pressure, what we usually talk about is a different term, CAD, coronary artery disease. That's the clogging up. I always have a little model around. We're all born with gorgeous, clean arteries, and we're very prone to develop clogged arteries. Could be to the brain, very commonly to the heart attacks, bypass stents. Could be to the legs, particularly if you're a smoker. And for men, many men get erectile dysfunction. That's very often this process to the pelvis, to the groin. So yes, can it be prevented? I mean, we all start like this, but unfortunately, poor sleep, cigarette smoking, eating fast food, processed food, junk food, cheese-heavy diets, meat-heavy diets, sugar-heavy diets, garbage, and then, stress, reaching for potato chips because we're stressed out. We shouldn't be developing this problem. About 20% of the problem is genetics. So you could actually be doing most everything right and still develop a problem with this. But for most of us, if you'll check your blood pressure, get your lab work, read, learn, follow people like you, it is a preventable disease largely, or, for many people completely. I don't say this at all to brag, but I just turned 62 and I have the technology to check my arteries and they are clean like when I was 20. And that's not because my family history is so good. My father had heart disease early in life. So the earlier you can, your age, that you start to understand how preventable diabetes, blood pressure, erectile dysfunction, heart disease, strokes are. And most of it is just common sense, but not what we're taught by our governments. Our governments don't teach us. They, at least in the States, they give companies money to make crap food, and then people get sick and the government has to take care of them through health insurance. It's a crazy cycle. We should be teaching prevent.
Yeah, it's extremely depressing where we are in the world right now. It's very, very challenging on many levels, and information and who controls the narrative appears to be key. Just wanted to ask you, is there data then in science in terms of the connection between heart health and exercise then? I'm sure there has to be bungs of trials done in that regard. So exercise and heart health, the science would back that up, that we should be regularly exercising. Is that a fair assumption?
And you're right. There's tremendous amount of science, looking at how many steps a day people walk. There's a famous center in Dallas, Texas called the Cooper Clinic. It's actually a fitness center named after a doctor, Kenneth Cooper, who wrote a book in maybe the 60s called Aerobics. Really early in the game, before the Rich Roll podcast, we had Dr. Kenneth Cooper telling us to walk, to run, get gym shoes. That was before Nike, before all the companies. And he started accumulating data. And there's no doubt, the more minutes a week you exercise, the more you lower your risk of developing obesity, diabetes, blood pressure, heart disease, the longer you live. Our American Heart Association says 25 minutes a day of moderate or vigorous exercise should be the goal. You want to do 90 minutes? You want to do it 90 minutes 3 times a week, 4 times a week? It's not that big of a challenge, 25 minutes a day, moderate or vigorous exercise, a little breathless. And you feel better, your blood sugar is better, your blood pressure is better, you'll sleep better, it lowers your cholesterol. I had a very interesting patient yesterday who lost 66 pounds in the last 8 months and needed to. And I said, how'd you do it? He goes, there's only one thing you got to do. A lot of exercise and really restrict your diet. And he has chosen a plant-based diet, and it will reverse so many medical problems. He used to be on the mask for sleeping. Already he doesn't need that mask anymore, the CPAP for sleep apnea. So, it takes hard work. It's easier to get fat and jolly and sick because the toxic food in our nature is to be lazy. But when you really got good health, it's so special. And I know you know that from your own health journey. We just don't we don't appreciate the miracle of waking up healthy. We got to. You got to work at it. It's not a free ride. There's no handout. There's no social security system. We're going to give you free health from the government. No, you got to work. You got to do it on your own.
I think part of my message is, I encourage people, don't be like me. Don't wait till you're sick until you change the course of your life.
Yeah.
Do it now. Whenever I'm out speaking to kids in schools, like I just share that's a good idea to do it now instead of waiting till something happens. What about this question? Because this is something I was intrigued about. Is there a connection? Have we got science to show that there's a connection between heart health and brain health then?
Yeah, more and more we're seeing, neurologists, we all say we have our own little area. Neurologists will do a research study on diet or lifestyle that helps slow down and prevent memory loss or maybe prevent stroke. In fact, there's a diet called the MIND diet, MIND, that was developed about 6 years ago in Chicago and studied that diet slows down memory loss in people at risk. Well, it's the same diet you'd apply to prevent and maybe reverse type 2 diabetes and prevent and maybe reverse heart disease. It's based on the Mediterranean diet combined with a diet called the DASH diet. Now, it's not a completely plant-based diet as it's published, but when we eat whole food plant-based, we're doing it. So the same risk factors, blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, sedentary lifestyle, smoking, and some genetics that clog up our heart arteries are the same risks for memory loss, stroke. It's really almost identical. And of course, there are some heart conditions like an irregular beat called fibrillation that puts people at risk for stroke. So yes, I spend a lot of my clinic day talking about brain health to heart patients because it is the same system.
Okay, I just wanted to talk to you about saturated fat. I'm aware of saturated fat because of the work of Dr. Swank. Whenever I was trying to figure out how can I improve my health, how can I fight back against MS, and Dr. Swank did this study over 30 years, and he figured out that those patients who limit their intake of saturated fat to 15 milligrams a day tend to have better outcomes. Now that research has been buried. People don't want to talk about it. But like I have sort of been following that, and that was part of my pathway to becoming vegan and plant-based. But then you have cardiologists, like I know you shared a stage with Asim Malhotra, who's telling people to eat cheese and burgers and pizza and all that sort of stuff. And he's like, and I don't want to dig too much into his and that kind of mentality using that, but just on saturated fat, like is that something that, are you in my page? Are you in Dr. Swank's page? You're clearly not a pizza meat guy, right?
Yeah. I'm very, very much in your camp. You're right. I know and have debated Dr. Malhotra. We agree on a lot of things, like too much dependence on the pharmaceutical industry and too much excess sugar and processed food. I mean, these are universal platforms we have to teach. Cook your own food, make your own food, grow a garden. But, the history in 1 minute is in the United States after World War II, a lot of guys came back with cigarettes. There was a little money around. Women were going to work and home cooked meals became a little less routine. Heart attacks started to really rise in frequency. Same thing happened in Finland, even worse in Finland. The number of heart attacks in 40 and 50-year-old men after World War II compared to before skyrocketed. So our government started spending money. Why are there so many heart attacks? Why did President Roosevelt die of high blood pressure and a stroke? Why did President Eisenhower have a large heart attack while he was in the White House? And one of the researchers, amongst many, was a famous United States researcher, Dr. Ansel Keys, who was hot on this topic and studied populations all over the world and made an observation, and it remains true. High saturated fat diets, butter, cheese, sausage, pastries, lots of meat, high heart disease rates, high blood cholesterol rates. Finland, again, won the award. Highest saturated fat foods, highest cholesterols, and highest heart attack rates. Then the country of Finland said, my God, we've got a problem. We need to teach people how to eat less saturated fat. And they took one part called North Karelia, Finland, in about 1970. They made a program, public health. We're going to reduce saturated fat in the diet. And the heart attack rate dropped 85% in the first 5 years. People were alive instead of being dead. So the whole country did it. And really, at the end of the day, there have been a couple really poorly done research studies that get enormous headlines. In part, the meat industry is wealthy and advertises in newspapers and magazines, the dairy industry, the restaurant industry. You know, these newspapers and media, they play up to the advertisers with the dollars. You know, the broccoli people don't have a lot of money and advertise. And just 2 or 3 famous papers in 2010 and 2014, you know, got headlines. Time magazine, that famous author Nina Teicholz wrote a book, and you know, they were very effective misinformation campaign. We hear a lot about misinformation. You know, if you go to medical societies, American Heart Association, the Irish Heart Association, the UK Heart Association, on and on, there's universal agreement. The recommendation all the way to 2021 is a low saturated fat diet to prevent or reverse heart disease. That means you're going to give up most or all of your egg yolks, most or all of your cheese, most or all of your butter, lard, and ghee, most or all of your red meats, white meats, and fish, because they all have saturated fat. And there's only basically 2 foods in the plant world that have a lot of saturated fat: coconut oil and palm oil. So when you eat plant-based, be cautious about coconut oil and palm oil because of their very high saturated fat content. Every other fruit, vegetable on the planet is just perfect. And of course, coconut oil is not a fruit or vegetable. It's a processed food extracted from a plant. So the saturated fat story shouldn't confuse anybody. Reduce it. And if you have heart disease, work very hard to reduce it substantially. Last comment. The largest, most expensive cardiac research study was published in 2020 called the ischemia study. The recommendation to every one of the 5,000 patients in that study was lower your saturated fat. You know, nothing's changed. 1950, 1960, 1970, this has been the recommendation. Dr. Malhotra and others confused the data. You don't put butter in your coffee. Dr. Malhotra puts butter in his coffee. No, I would not recommend that. I just got off the phone with a famous patient in Mumbai, India, and his diet is it's classic. I'm vegetarian. Well, what's in your meal? Paneer, yogurt, dairy, ghee. It's a high saturated fat plant diet, which for him with heart disease, I've got to try and teach him now. You know, read a book by Dr. Esselstyn, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Not everybody needs to do it to this degree, but if you have a disease and you're working to reverse it, you do want to follow a program like that.
So excellent. Quick segue into inflammation, right? So I talk about
more than a minute. I apologize.
It was 3.5, right? So quick segue into inflammation. I talk about inflammation a lot because I know for MS patients, inflammation can cause relapses. It can cause the immune system to attack itself. And of course, I then found out that inflammation is a key driver in cancer and diabetes and depression. It seems to be a resident in all of these diseases. One of the reasons why I stopped eating meat and dairy then was because these products can cause and lead to inflammation. But then it conflicts a little bit because there's good inflammation and there's bad inflammation. I wonder, could you wrap that up in 2 minutes for me?
Yeah, there's kind of controlled acute inflammation and then there's uncontrolled chronic inflammation. You know, you cut your finger. We learned this in medical school. Cut your finger. it gets red, it gets warm, it gets sore, it gets swollen. That's the body's immune system responding to injury. And hopefully in a couple of days, you see the improvement. That's controlled, acute, helpful inflammation. But we had a clue 150 years ago from a pathologist that told us heart disease is in part excess white blood cells, excess inflammation cells when you cut up tissue in an autopsy. And we really learned it since a blood test came out called the high sensitivity C-reactive protein. If you want to be healthy, you want that lab test to be in the normal range. If you're overweight, eating processed food, don't go to the dentist, don't sleep, smoke cigarettes, it's going to be elevated. And if it's elevated, your finger will heal in 2-3 days. If every day, biochemically, your immune system is overworking, trying to deal with lifestyle choices, smoking habits, sedentary lifestyles, obesity, and such, it takes a toll, and it does make us more prone to type 2 diabetes, cancers, brain disease, definitely heart disease. And it's beautiful to watch people like you make lifestyle change. I will say, I really tell plant-based eaters, get enough omega-3 foods, chia, flax, hemp seeds, walnuts, leafy greens, maybe algae-based omega-3 capsules, because omega-3 is often missing from all diets, including plant-based diets. It's very anti-inflammatory. And then you recheck the lab results and you see that excess dangerous inflammation goes away. You know, get the belly a little flatter, start moving a little bit more, eat your fruits and vegetables, and a very anti-inflammatory diet.
Excellent. So I just want to read out a quote that I listened to. I thought it was really powerful. And it was actually, I think it was one of the clips on YouTube, can't remember one, but you said that the environmental impact of your food choices is the single biggest decision you can make for planet Earth. Can you please tell me and my listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, that's shifting from our health to the health of a very strained planet in terms of, you know, a population approaching 8 billion, and we're talking about 10 billion only a decade or two away. And, you know, water and air and nature and forests and food production without poisoning the world. And there's pretty good agreement, and there's many stresses on the planet, including industrial pollution and maybe warming and the oceans rising and glaciers melting. But the environmental costs of food production are clearly greater for meat than they are for plant-based foods. One of the most interesting examples, I'm not a big fan of the plant-based burgers that are out there now, Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat Burger. But from an environmental standpoint, the University of Michigan, my school, was asked to do a study. Here's a 1/4 pound beef burger. Here's a 1/4 pound Beyond Meat plant burger. What was the environmental consequence? And there was 90% less water use to make a plant-based burger. There was 50% less exposure to greenhouse gases. So that's just one little scientific example. You know, when you multiply it by 3 meals a day and all the choices, yeah, there are environmental consequences to growing plants and fertilizer use and the rest. But we need to move over. And that's the United Nations says that. The World Health Organization says that. Oxford University says this. Our own U.S. Department of Agriculture says this. You know, and then leaders like James Cameron and even sometimes Richard Branson and others talk about plant-based eating for the environment. Lewis Hamilton, you know, Formula One driver extraordinaire. I mean, they get it. They understand it. And there's that recent documentary called Seaspiracy about the oceans and fish. But the other one is Cowspiracy about 4 or 5 years ago. Great documentary that everybody should watch and study.
Excellent. So last 5 minutes, we're going to hit you I've asked some of my followers on Instagram for some questions, right? So I want to hit you quick and fast with these ones. So what about alcohol and heart health? Can drinking too much affect your heart health?
Yeah, definitely the answer to what you just said is yes. It's really a sticky wicket, the question, because, you know, there's in many things a sweet spot. it may be, if you have the discipline to have as much as one alcoholic drink a day, could be wine, could be beer, could be hard liquor, and you can control that and you don't get in trouble with your liver or your driving or all. And that is the European recommendation, 1 drink a day for a man or a woman as the upper limit. Heart health studies say that's beneficial. And there's way too many studies to ignore. However, you know, we have that potential for addiction or a bad judgment with driving, or you know, not limiting it and having 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can put your heart into fibrillation, a fast beat. It's called holiday heart. We have a holiday coming up here, July 4th weekend, you know, and if you do your 12 beers on the boat, you might wake up, you know, with your heart rate. And so that's a classic example. Some people, their blood pressure goes up with alcohol. There is some connection in large studies between more alcohol and some cancers, including breast cancer. Although in general, overall, even the most recent studies in general, a limited controlled social use of a glass of wine, 1 beer, 1 Jameson Irish whiskey, not too much more than that. You know, if you can control it, it's not an all or none. But I admire people that don't drink at all. I do enjoy, you know, an alcoholic beverage during the week.
So in Ireland, we have our national drink is Guinness, and apparently there's iron in Guinness, apparently, and that's why we drink a lot of Guinness, allegedly. So we've probably got too much iron in our bodies in Ireland, maybe, possibly.
Interesting.
Look, what about, should everyone be supplementing vitamin B12, right? Not just vegans or plant-based people, but I mean everyone. Do you want to just dig into that a little bit for me?
Yeah, and vitamin B12, important for nerves, brain, blood cells. Not the easiest thing, you know, cows, chicken, poultry, they don't make B12, but if they're out in the field, they're getting B12 from just eating the grass with dirt all over it, because it's actually the bacteria in the dirt. Most animals now are raised in confined warehouse building situations, very cruel situations, and there's no dirt for them to eat, so they actually get injected with B12. So meat eaters may get B12 secondhand through an animal. It's not necessary. And there are a few plant-based foods, you know, the nori rolls, if you're eating sushi. There's actually a very interesting green vegetable being grown in Israel called mankai, M-A-N-K-A-I. You can put in a smoothie, has some B12. Nutritional yeast may have a little. And there are vegans who show blood levels that are very healthy without taking supplements. My patients, I recommend take B12 daily or 3 or 4 times a week. And it is the recommendation to the American public age 50 and up to protect brain and nerve health. It is recommended that everybody take B12. That's not a recommendation you hear a lot, but it is part of the guidelines because many people, I'm telling you, anytime you hear a vegan, what do? You got to take vitamins. The general American public I deal with have multiple vitamin deficiencies. I got to get online or on a phone call with a dentist after this. His omega-3 level, his vitamin D level, his B12 level. And this is one of, you know, an upper level, healthy, nutrition focused person. So if your doctor says take a multivitamin or take a B12, it's a good recommendation.
Okay, last 2 questions. So in the last 6 weeks, I went through what I call a heart MOT. I've had a heart CT scan. Good news being my cardiologist told me my arteries are clean as a whistle, which was amazing because I've been procrastinating for years. I do the Ironmans and I've always been worried about having a problem there, regardless of my physique. But so is it important that people get a heart CT scan, and at what age?
Yeah. So, right. So everybody knows, you lie on a stretcher, you go into a machine that looks like a circle, a CT scanner, you hold your breath for 10 seconds, no needle, no injection, no pain, no fear, no claustrophobia. You go home and the CT scan says your heart arteries have no calcium because it's called a calcium CT scan. That's excellent news. And your chance of running into heart disease in the next 5 to 10 years is almost zero. But if it comes back 300, 400, 600, 800, meaning your arteries are full of calcium. If people know they're at risk, my father had a heart attack at age 42. I smoked 2 packs a day till last year. My cholesterol's 280. My blood sugar. Do that between age 40 and 45. There's a lot of people have heart disease detectable. And in the United States, that test costs about $75. Of course, there's a documentary, maybe you know this, called The Widowmaker movie that was made through the Irish Heart Fund. They funded it. It's you must watch documentary, The Widowmaker movie, all about this CT scan and the connection to Ireland, actually. If you've led the clean life, maybe age 45 to 50, but for the safety and the low cost, get it done. You don't do it every year. Like you're a zero, perfect. You might do it again in 5 to 10 years. So it's a really simple way to try and avoid a tragedy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've had that happen to a friend of mine in the last few years, which really pushed me to get this done. Yeah. So last question from Eamon in Australia, a good friend of mine. Your thoughts on the Blue Zone studies and what nutritional and exercise tips would you suggest for a 45-year-old father and business owner? So thoughts on the Blue Zone studies and then some nutritional tips, exercise for Eamon and his lifestyle.
Right. So the Blue Zone studies, I know Dan Buettner, who wrote the books, owns the name Blue Zones. There is a researcher in Italy who claims he came up. I was watching a TV show, and here's an Italian scientist in Sardinia, Italy, who said it was my idea to call it the Blue Zones. I'll let them fight it out. I don't know. But the idea that there are areas where people live on average longer in good health, statistically, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Icaros, Greece, a part of Costa Rica, and one city in California, United States. And that they, in common, they're more active, they're family-oriented, they eat plant-forward diets rich in beans or lentils or peas. They often don't smoke, of course. They're religious, or they have some faith in their life. I actually, it's such a universal observation. I find the Blue Zones, the books and the message very, very relevant and excellent to follow. Dan Buettner is dating a lovely plant-based hero named Kathy Freston, and her own books and recipes are excellent too. One called Veganish, and I know she's got a new one out called 72 Reasons to Be Vegan. So I find their work very inspiring. I share it a lot. Some argue it's not the most academic group of data. It shows up on their website, not necessarily in, published medical science, but it's pretty hard to argue with the message they're sharing. It seems universally on target.
Okay, excellent. Well, listen, that's it. I want to thank you again for the service. I don't know if you realize, but it's amazing stuff. You're a superstar doctor to me, whether you like it or not. I really appreciate your time. I know you're so busy, but it's been an absolute privilege to have you on Money and Plants.
Well, thank you. And if any of your followers have questions, just shoot me them. Or if you ever want to, hop back on and take a different path. I have an interest in a genetic cholesterol called lipoprotein A. That could be easily a good 25, 30 minutes because it's relevant everywhere, but we'll deal with that another time.
Absolutely my privilege. You look after yourself and have a great weekend. Thank you, Dr. Kahn.
Thank you very much.